Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. The third main character comes in not long after the other two, and her name is Estelle Rigaut, and she comes in very worried that she's going to have to confront her ex-lover who had apparently shot himself in the face. And she's surprised to find out that no, she's in with these other two who she has seemingly nothing in common with at all. What can we say about her? Well, she is, in a certain respect, a rags to riches story through marrying an older man. And it's worth sort of spending a little bit of time on that part of her story. She says this early on. She says, I lost my parents when I was a kid, and I had my young brother to bring up. We were terribly poor, and when an old friend of my people asked me to marry him, I said yes. He was very well off and quite nice. My brother was a very delicate child and needed all sorts of attention, so really that was the right thing for me to do, don't you agree? My husband was old enough to be my father, but for 6 years we had a happy married life. Then 2 years ago I met the man I was fated to love. We knew at the moment we set eyes on each other. He asked me to run away with him and I refused. Then I got pneumonia and it finished me. That's the whole story. No doubt by certain standards I did wrong to sacrifice my youth to a man nearly 3 times my age. Do you think that could be called a sin? And what's interesting about this is that it shows that she's, from the beginning, telling a story that's plausible because it has some elements that are actually truthful, but it's superficial. It's not actually getting at what her real motives were, not even the real facts. She's leaving out some very important facts that are going to surface a bit later. You know there's more to the story because she's worried about seeing somebody who shot his face off when she comes in. But she's telling this very genteel, another term that I should put in here is she's kind of not only superficial, but she's also, and I'm going to use the word pseudo here, she's a pseudo-romantic. She would like everything to be nice and lovey-dovey and for her to be the center of courtship and attention. And she tells this story about the self-sacrificing heroine who, to take care of her young sick brother, marries a man who's much older. But even then, it's still good for 6 years. They love each other. But then she meets the man who, it was in the stars for her to cross paths with and to love, even though, she was already married to somebody else. And she uses this kind of romanticism to justify her choices to do the wrong thing, to cheat, to deceive. And we're going to see this, what's going on with her is gradually all of this is sort of peeled away. And it's peeled away in a different way than it is with Garcin. With Garcin, it's his own sort of questioning, the corrosiveness of his own reflection, aided by Inez, to a lesser extent by Estelle, that tears away the illusions. He's already worried himself about whether he's doing the right thing. Estelle is somebody who almost perfectly exemplifies what Sartre calls bad faith. She could be the woman who he describes in Being in Nothingness, who goes out on a date knowing full well that the guy's going to expect her to put out at the end of the date and doesn't want to think about that, wants to think he's really a nice guy. And, the guy takes her hand And she doesn't quite commit to her hand being in his hand, because that would mean that she knows where this is going. But she doesn't pull it away either, because that would also imply that she knows where it's going. Instead, she just kind of leaves it there neutrally and lets things happen until they get to the point of no return, at which point she can say, I didn't know what to do. My hand was forced. Estelle is that kind of person. And yet, at the same time, she is acting, she is choosing. She's actually, in many respects, quite manipulative, but disguises this from herself. So she represents a certain character type, you might say. She cheated on her husband. We find that out early on. It's only with a bit more time in, where they start stripping away the blinds, that we find out that she actually killed her baby daughter. That's why she's in hell, not just for, not for making the mistake of marrying not for love, and to take care of her brother, and not just because she cheated on her husband, but because she killed her own daughter, who is the result of that affair. And they question her. They say, well, you're down here because you had this affair. And she says, that's not it. Finally, she says, you've got it all wrong, you two. He wanted me to have a baby. They were saying you didn't want to be with him because he was poor, and he killed himself because you wouldn't be with him. She says, no, he wanted me to have a baby. And Garcin says, and you didn't want one. And then she says, I certainly didn't. But the baby came. Worse luck. I went to Switzerland for 5 months. No one knew anything. It was a girl. Roger was with me when she was born. It pleased him to no end having a daughter. It didn't please me. So the man who she's cheating with is delighted that they've had this baby together. And you can imagine all sorts of circumstances where maybe he takes the child and goes off somewhere. Instead, I'll tell you in her own words, there was a balcony overlooking the lake. I brought a big stone. He could see what I was up to and kept on shouting, Estelle, for God's sake, don't. I hated him then. He saw it all. He was leaning over the balcony, and he saw the rings spreading out on the water. And then Garcin says, yes, and then? And now notice, there is no remorse there whatsoever. There is no sense that something horrible has happened. She says, I came back to Paris and he did as he wished. And what he wished was to kill himself after that. And he says, Garcin says, you mean he blew his brains out? And Estelle says, it was absurd of him, really. My husband never suspected anything. And what this shows is that she's still not getting it. She created a child with this man, kills the child, and then her only view on it is the child was sort of an exposition of the fact that she cheated. And so now that the child is gone, everything should be A-OK, and there is no reason for him to kill himself. Why should he have felt bad? So she's really not getting it. And in a certain way, she may deserve to be there more than them because of the degree of self-deception that she's involved in. Another thing that is absolutely central to her character and part of why the play actually works is because Estelle exists in the gaze and the desire of others, primarily men. And there's an early sort of flirtation that's taking place with Inez, which is part of why Inez is actually going to be so upset. This is part of the trap that's being laid for Inez. And she says to Inez that she exists in the eyes of others. Inez offers her a mirror. This is early on, and here we go. This is after they're supposed to be being quiet. Here we go. She asks, do you have a mirror? And Inez says, I think I do, in my purse. So she checks. But she doesn't. So she says, come on over here. I'll be your mirror. And she ends up telling Estelle that her makeup is a bit off and she likes it that way. All of those sorts of things. I'm not finding the exact passage, so I'll have to sort of summarize it. Here we go. She says to Inez, I feel so strange. Don't you ever get taken that way? When I can't see myself, I begin to wonder if I really and truly exist. I pat myself just to make sure, but it doesn't help much. And Inez says, I don't have that problem. I can't get away from my existence. I know what I'm like. I'm always conscious of myself in my mind, painfully conscious. And Garcin would probably say the same thing. And Estelle says, yes, in your mind. But everything that goes on in one's head is so vague, isn't it? It makes one want to sleep. I've got 6 big mirrors in my bedroom. There they are. I can see them, but they don't see me. They're reflecting the carpet, the settee, the window. But how empty it is, a glass in which I am absent. So what you've got here is somebody who knows that she exists and knows what she is only when it's being mirrored back to her. She needs the other to tell her what she is and how she is. She says, somehow it kept me alert, seeing myself as the others saw me. Without that, she can't really be sure what she's like. She says, Inez asks her, am I not nicer than your glass? And Estelle says, I don't know. You really scare me, rather. My reflection in the glass never did that, of course. I knew it so well, like something I had tamed. So what Estelle really wants is to be surrounded by others and by others who satisfy the kinds of desires that she has, one of the most basic of which is a rather narcissistic desire to be seen, to be affirmed. And she'll talk about this a little bit later on when she's able to see this young man who she didn't have an affair with but was sort of leading on. And he's dancing with this other woman who was friends with her and him. And she, her name's Olga. And he says, they're dancing together. She can see what's going on. And he says, Inez says, who's Peter? And Estelle says, such a silly boy, he called me his glancing stream. Just fancy, he was terribly in love with me. She's persuaded him to come out with her tonight. And why does this bother Estelle? She says, he belonged to me. I had captivated him. She exists in the gaze, not just the gaze, but the desire of others, primarily men. This is why she's such a frustration for Inez, because she says, Inez, you don't count. You don't matter. You're nothing. Because you can't give me what I want. That guy over there, though, he sure can. And a little bit later on, when he is, going through his qualms about, am I a coward? She says, or he also says, Estelle, you must give me your trust. He's looking for a sort of spiritual connection to her. She says, oh, what a nuisance you are. I'm giving you my mouth, my arms, my whole body, and everything could be so simple. My trust, I haven't any to give. I'm afraid, and you're making me terribly embarrassed. Why can't we just exist, and be involved with this on the physical level? Don't you desire me? Just shut up. And let's, do what we're going to do. And eventually, he goes through his whole discussion of, am I a coward? Am I not a coward? Inez says, Estelle, do you like cowards? And she says, if you knew how little I care. Coward or hero, it's all one, provided he kisses well. A little bit later, as it turns out that she was kind of joking about that, but she really does have a sort of indifference about this. She says, I'd love you just the same even if you were a coward. Isn't that enough? She also says to him, you know, you don't really have a coward's face or a coward's voice, and that's enough for me. So this is her character. She's, you know, she's not a sex pot. She's not just motivated by that. Really, she doesn't actually desire him so much as to be desired by him. And to reduce everything to that level, where she knows that she exists, where, paradoxically, it's safer for her. She's, in a certain way, even more damaged than Inez or Garcin are.